Hi, my name is Kira Vale. Thank you for being here with me. If you want to hear more true family drama stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe. It gives me the strength to keep pulling these moments out of the shadows and laying them down where they can finally breathe. The soup wasn't boiling, but it was hot enough to sting. I felt it soak through the thin fabric of my white blouse, broccoli and cheddar sliding down between my shoulder blades in a slow, humiliating trickle. The smell was unmistakable burnt dairy and overcooked vegetables, cafeteria food pretending to be a meal. The room didn't erupt into laughter the way sitcoms tell you it should. It fractured instead into short, sharp exhalations. A cough disguised as a chuckle. A smirk someone tried to cover with a sip of coffee. And then the sharp click of an iPhone shutter. One photograph. Proof already out of my hands. I stood still, the kind of stillness that makes people think you're either broken or dangerous. My sister Camilla leaned back in her chair, lips parted in a smile designed for the camera, even though she wasn't the one holding the phone. She always knew where the lenses were pointed. Around the table, the fluorescent lights hummed like insects trapped in glass. Behind them, my colleagues stared at their screens as if my humiliation were a background noise they could mute. It was supposed to be a working lunch. Sandwiches stacked in cardboard boxes, soup cups sweating grease through thin lids, papers spread like offerings on the long glass table. Instead, it turned into a theater. My body was the stage, my blouse, the backdrop, and Camilla, the director who never missed her cue. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even move to wipe the soup away. That's what she wanted: noise drama, a spectacle that would burn itself into the company's memory as another moment where Kira Vale couldn't hold her own. I learned long ago that silence unsettles more than fury. Fury is expected. Silence leaves space. And into that space, I slid the truth not with words, but with records. In my head, the words came clear and sharp like I was narrating my own obituary. I do not answer with noise. I answer with documents. What Camilla never understood was that while she collected attention, I collected evidence. Every email, every slide deck stripped of my name, every credit line rewritten to shine on her. They lived in my folders, each one tagged and dated, building a case like bricks stacked into a wall. And now, with soup dripping down my back and a photo already uploaded to some private Slack channel, I realized this was the moment the wall stopped being invisible. For the rest of the meeting, voices droned on schedules and deliverables, repeated as though nothing had happened. Dana from HR cleared her throat once, but said nothing. Logan made a joke about extra seasoning on the data reports, drawing polite laughter that fluttered and died. Ethan, the youngest analyst, glanced at me once long enough to register something in his eyes. Not pity. Recognition. But I didn't need their sympathy. I had something stronger, the kind of memory that doesn't fade because it isn't stored in flesh. It's stored in files. So I sat there, soup clinging cold against my skin, and thought, go ahead. Take the photo. Spread it. Laugh. Because the next image would not be hers. It would be mine. Have you ever been humiliated in public at work? Press 1. If yes, 0 if no. The smell clung before the sight did. Broccoli and cheddar soup, half-curdled, steaming faintly from its flimsy cup. Plastic lids that bent and popped when you pressed them too hard. Cardboard sandwich boxes sweating grease onto the polished glass table. Every surface promised productivity. PowerPoint printouts, sticky notes, a stack of markers that no one would uncap. But beneath the buzz of the fluorescent lights, nothing about this gathering was work. It was spectacle. The air conditioner rattled overhead, pushing out cold air that smelled faintly metallic like recycled pennies. The hum filled the silence between words, a white noise that made every laugh sharper, every cough more conspicuous. It was impossible to forget the soup because its odor seeped into everything, into the paper folders, into the hair of the intern sitting 2 chairs down, into the very fabric of my blouse, now ruined by Camilla's theatrics. She joked too much, as she always did. Camilla treated the glass-walled conference room like a stage, the entire floor of MSG like her audience. Every quip landed like she expected applause. Careful with the cheddar upgrade, she had set her voice pitched just loud enough to travel across the room. Then she mimed an exaggerated slip of the wrist as if her spilling soup on me were a slapstick, a scene rehearsed in a sitcom instead of lived in a company where reputations could fracture over crumbs. Laughter rippled brittle and brief. People laughed not because it was funny, but because it was safer than silence. That's what Camilla cultivated, an atmosphere where you either joined her spotlight or disappeared in its shadow. I sat at the far edge of the table, close enough to touch the glass wall if I leaned back. I could see my own reflection faintly, the outline of my white blouse now marred by an irregular stain the color of rusted gold. I thought about how space works in these rooms. The center seats belong to those who command, who claim, who have the luxury of turning mistakes into punchlines. The edges are for the expendable, the placeholders, the people who prepare data but aren't trusted to narrate it. I was on the edge. Not by accident. By design. Camilla leaned forward, reclaiming the middle like it was her birthright, tossing her hair back as she slid her hand over the project timeline I had drafted the night before. "We'll be fast-tracking phase 2, she said with the confidence of someone who knew no one would ask who had actually built the framework. Her nails tapped the paper with authority, each tap rewriting authorship in real time. I looked down at my sleeve. The soup had left not just a stain, but a mark, an unintended autograph. It felt like someone had taken a pen and written across my skin. "Not yours. Never yours." That was Camilla's specialty. She wrote over me in ways invisible to most eyes. My work became her deck. My analysis became her insight. My caution became her foresight. And now my blouse became her joke, a permanent annotation I would carry until I could afford to replace the fabric. The soup wasn't food. It was ink. A smear of someone else's narrative bleeding into my story, claiming space that wasn't hers to claim. I sat straighter in my chair, letting the edge of the table dig into my ribs. In this place, if you're not at the center of power, you're pushed to the margins. I had known that since my first day at MSG, but the truth had never been clearer than it was with soup drying sticky against my back and laughter echoing off glass. From the corner of my eye, I caught Ethan shifting uncomfortably, his gaze darting between me and Camilla. He didn't laugh. That mattered even if no one else noticed. Meanwhile, Dana from HR scribbled a note in her leather notebook. Her expression smooth, neutral, unreadable, the kind of neutrality that isn't justice, but avoidance. Logan filled the silence with another ill-timed quip about spilled secrets on the table, earning himself a chorus of chuckles that made him beam as if he'd landed a TED Talk. The room smelled of dairy plastic and fear, the trifecta of corporate lunches where no one really eats and no one really works. I pressed my palm flat against the table, feeling the chill of the glass seep into my skin. The stain on my blouse wasn't just humiliation. It was evidence. A mark left by another's hand, proof that someone had tried to write me out by writing over me. They thought it would vanish with detergent fade like gossip after a weekend. But I had learned to archive what others dismissed. To file every stain, every omission, every stolen line. Camilla could own the center. I would own the margins. Because the margins are where records live, and records last longer than applause. It began not with a meeting, not with a speech, but with a notification ping. The sound was tiny, almost apologetic, but it cut sharper than any laugh in that glass room. A forwarded message landed in my inbox with no subject line, no preamble, just a screenshot clipped from a private chat. At the top, the sender's name, Ethan Rao, the youngest analyst, careful with words, careful with silence. Which made me wonder, was this a mistake, or was it intention disguised as error? The screenshot was brief, but it didn't need to be long. In a thread between two senior managers, my name appeared, though not the one I signed. Not Kira Vale, strategist, architect of data flows, builder of the very dashboards they pitched to clients. No, in this hidden corner of corporate banter, I was reduced to 3 words and a set of parentheses. Trophy wife beta. Trophy wife. Beta. A phrase heavy with mockery, a dismissal wearing the mask of a joke. My marriage wasn't private gossip anymore. It was office shorthand. I wasn't a strategist. I was a prop, a placeholder, a test version of someone's insult. For a moment, the screen blurred as though the words themselves had burned into my vision. I didn't breathe. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached across my desk for my planner, the battered leather-bound book I kept as my private ledger. I tore a square of yellow sticky paper from the stack and wrote in neat block letters, "Do not argue. Archive." That had become my mantra. Anger vanishes, but records remain. I pasted the note onto the page dated that afternoon directly beside the meeting schedule Camilla had hijacked, where my contributions were already erased from the agenda. One more layer of evidence. One more stone in the wall I was building, brick by brick, insult by insult. But a sticky note wasn't enough. Digital things slip. Messages vanish. Edited. Deleted. Denied. I had learned that the hard way when slides I built were stripped of metadata before reaching the client. This time I wanted something no one could erase. So I took my phone, opened the screenshot Ethan had forwarded, and pressed the side buttons until the shutter clicked. A second later, I pulled a small Polaroid printer from my drawer, an indulgence maybe, but one I never regretted. The machine word spit out a glossy square, and there it was, trophy wife Beta, frozen in ink, tangible as a scar. I held the Polaroid in my hand, watching as the colors deepened, the text sharpening like bruises blooming on paper. The smell of developing chemicals mingled with the faint odor of soup still lingering on my blouse, an odd marriage of humiliation and preservation. I slid the photo into a plastic sleeve at the back of my planner, alongside other slips emails, reprinted meeting minutes, annotated even the faint carbon copy of my own signature that Camilla had once cropped from a project charter. Together, they formed an archive not just of what I had done, but of what had been done to me. The photo didn't lie. It didn't soften. It didn't forget. Unlike people, it would not laugh nervously and change the subject. Unlike managers, it would not claim neutrality. Unlike Camilla, it would not rewrite the story. As I tucked the planner shut, I traced the spine with my finger, steadying myself. Somewhere outside my office, the sound of heels clicked against tile, followed by bursts of chatter. Life at MSG moved on oblivious. But inside my desk drawer, a file grew heavier, and I grew quieter. Not weaker, but sharper, like a blade hidden in its sheath. The first drop had landed. Not soup this time, but something more permanent, a phrase distilled into proof, printed into matter. Trophy wife Beta. A joke to them, a weapon to me. I didn't know yet whether Ethan had sent it by accident or by allegiance. But I knew the wall was rising higher, the archive thicker. One day when the lights were brightest and the phones recording, I would lay the Polaroids down like cards on a table, and the people who laughed would see themselves in the ink. For now, I wrote one last line under my sticky note, a line I would return to many times before the end: "Do not erase what they want forgotten." And then I closed the planner, the Polaroid tucked safe inside, waiting for its turn to speak. Bathrooms are supposed to be neutral ground, places where the world's performance pauses, where no one expects to be seen. But in MSG, even the stalls had eyes. I had escaped there after another meeting where Camilla's voice drowned out my own, her jokes dripping into the minutes like ink stains. My chest felt tight, as though the air itself had learned to weigh more inside those glass walls. I slipped into the last stall, closed the door, and sat with my palms pressed against the cool divider. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, a sound like static caught between frequencies. I breathed hard, each inhale, jagged each exhale, fighting for rhythm. My blouse still carried the faint yellow mark from the soup incident, stubborn, visible even after a careful wash. Looking at it had become a ritual reminder: silence costs, but evidence lasts. Still in that moment, all I wanted was a pause. Just 1 minute to gather myself away from the cameras, the chatter, the glass. But silence doesn't survive where phones exist. By the time I emerged washed, my face straightened my shoulders, the damage was already alive online. A blurry photo taken from the mirror, angled just enough to capture me, hunched in the stall. Head bowed, breath visible in the tremor of my back. The caption was short, meant to disappear in 24 hours. Some people aren't made for pressure. I stared at it on my screen, the words hammering harder than the image. Not made for pressure. Not made. As if existence itself was being questioned, reduced to a temporary story for strangers to swipe past between brunch selfies and pet videos. The photo spread fast, whispered through private group chats, punctuated with laughing emojis. No one said my name, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew who wore the soup-stained blouse. Everyone knew who sat at the edge of the table. I carried my phone to HR like a student delivering a detention slip. Dana sat behind her desk, neat as ever, her expression carved into polite neutrality. I showed her the post, my voice, even my hands steady. Her eyes flicked across the screen. She sighed a controlled release of air and adjusted her glasses. They didn't mention you by name, Kira. Without identification, it isn't actionable. Not actionable. 2 words colder than the metal stall wall. As if not naming me erased the evidence of my body, my posture, my breath. As if harm only counted when it had a tag attached. I nodded once, slid the phone back into my bag, and left without answering. Dana's role was never to intervene. It was to preserve the company's equilibrium, to cover rot with a coat of beige paint. At my desk, I opened the drawer where my private archive grew heavier by the week. I printed the photo on thick paper, the pixels grainy, the caption sharp. The image was cruel, but cruelty could be preserved. Cruelty could be reclassified. I pulled a new binder from the stack, its cover plain, black, its spine bare. With a marker, I wrote the title in bold capital letters, Survival, Not Drama. Because that's what this was. Not petty conflict, not theatrics for the crowd, but survival. My survival. And survival requires proof. I slid the printout into the first sleeve of the binder, smoothed it flat, and let my hand linger on the plastic. This wasn't humiliation anymore. It was evidence. A record of pressure endured. The binder snapped shut with a quiet click, the sound final, almost ceremonial. Outside my office, laughter echoed down the hall. Phones buzzed, cameras flashed. But in my drawer, silence transformed into permanence. They wanted me blurred, half-seen, captioned into disappearance. I wanted the opposite. I wanted the archive. And one day, when the lights burned brightest and the glass walls could no longer hide their fractures, I knew the archive would speak louder than their stories. Every year, MSG staged its gala like a coronation. Chandeliers blazing champagne glasses aligned in neat pyramids, a stage set with banners that proclaimed the year's chosen virtues. This time, the words glittered in gold foil against navy velvet leadership strength unity. 3 nouns inflated like balloons floating above us as if repetition alone could make them true. I wore white again, always white. Some would call it stubborn, others foolish, but to me it was insistence. Every stain, every shadow showed more clearly against white, and that was the point. Camilla swept in sequins, the kind that caught every flashbulb. She orbited the executives as though the entire night had been choreographed around her entrance. I stayed near the edge of the room where the chandelier's light bent into fractured patterns on the floor. I mingled when required, answered questions about projects when asked, but mostly I observed. I had learned that proximity mattered more than contribution. If you weren't in the center of the photograph, you might as well not exist. The official photographer circled like a hawk, snapping shots of smiling faces, glasses raised, hands clasped as if unity could be staged into permanence. At one point, he herded us together in front of the banner. Camilla slid effortlessly toward the middle, flanked by Logan with his grinning bravado, and Dana with her carefully neutral poise. I ended up near the side, half hidden behind a tall potted plant dragged in for decor. Closer, closer, the photographer urged, waving us inward. But the edges have gravity, and I was pulled back, framed by leaves. The camera clicked a series of rapid shutters, and the moment was captured. Leadership strength unity, above a cluster of executives below, and me, half a face, half a presence, blurred behind green shadows. When the photos went public the next morning, one image became the centerpiece. The company's official post captioned it with triumph, Leadership Strength Unity at MSG. The comments flooded in applause from clients, congratulations from partners. No one mentioned the detail in the corner, the half-visible woman obscured by leaves, her white blouse cutting faintly against the darkness, her face severed by framing. Half a face, half a life. Cropped by accident, they would claim. Cropped by oversight. But I knew better. Photos tell stories, and every crop is an edit. Cropping says this part doesn't matter. This person doesn't count. It stung deeper than the soup and sharper than the bathroom story. Because this wasn't a joke or a caption. This was silence made visible, erasure disguised as aesthetic. The plant's leaves weren't just decoration. They were symbols, green blades, cutting me out of the narrative while pretending to beautify it. I printed the photo that afternoon. High-resolution glossy finished the gold letters sharp above the smiling faces. Then I trimmed it with scissors, slicing along the line where the leaf obscured me, separating myself from the others. One half in my hand, one half on my desk. Evidence, not art. I filed it into the growing folder I had titled Erasure. Inside were other pieces slides where my name had been deleted, meeting notes where my contributions had been replaced. Now this photograph that declared unity while literally dividing me out. The motif was undeniable. In soup stains, captions, and crops, they were writing over me, cutting me from the frame. And yet every attempt left residue. Stains can be traced, captions, screenshotted photos archived. Erasure leaves its own evidence. That night, lying awake with the gala still echoing in my head, I replayed the photo in my mind. The flash, the leaves, the words above us. Leadership, strength, unity. What they didn't realize was that the image told a truer story than they intended. Leadership distorted by performance. Strength defined by exclusion. Unity fractured by silence. And me, half seen but still there. Still present, still recorded, still archived. The leaf could cover my face, but it couldn't erase my presence. The crop could cut me out, but the negative space I left behind would always reveal itself. They thought they had hidden me. What they had done instead was give me another piece for the archive. Another artifact that whispered you were there. You mattered. They tried to cut you out, and in doing so, they left a mark. I closed the folder, its spine growing heavier in my drawer. My survival wasn't loud. It was documented. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that smelled of burnt coffee in the break room and stale air conditioning pushed too hard through the vents. I logged into the employee portal, the same routine I had done countless times before, usually to confirm project allocations or check my accrued vacation hours. But this time, something different caught my eye. My title. Where it had once read Senior Strategic Data Analyst, a role I had earned through late nights, detailed frameworks, and metrics that spoke louder than any speech, it now read Online Associate Communications. Associate. Communications. Words that belonged to someone else's resume, not mine. They were vague enough to be harmless, but sharp enough to slice away years of work. Associate instead of strategist. Communications instead of data. It looked like a demotion disguised as simplification, the kind of erasure that smiles while it rewrites you. I clicked again, refreshing the page, hoping it was a glitch. But the screen held steady. My degrees, too, were missing. The graduate diploma in data systems, the certifications in strategic modeling, all gone, as though they had never existed. The portal chimed softly, a polite electronic ding, confirming the change as if my life could be edited by a notification. A line of text blinked across the bottom of the screen. Pair record approved by your department head. I knew exactly whose approval that meant. My fingers froze on the keyboard, but only for a moment. Then I started to type, not in panic, but in precision. Every keystroke sounded deliberate, the clatter of keys echoing in my small office like gunfire. I navigated into the version history of the portal, pulling up the archive of changes logged behind the interface. Each modification left a fingerprint, a trail. There it was. A timestamp from 2 nights ago, long after I had logged out. An edit authorized not by the faceless HR database, but by a name I knew too well, Camilla Vale. Her digital signature glowed at the bottom of the entry, smug in its formality. She had clicked confirmed and erased, and the system accepted it without question. For a moment, anger surged hot, flooding my chest, but I forced it down, channeling it the way I always did into record-keeping. I took a screenshot, then another. I downloaded the version history into a PDF, saving it into a hidden folder labeled Credentials Unaltered. I printed one copy, let the machine spit out warm paper with Camilla's digital autograph sealed at the bottom. The printer hummed like a quiet witness, each page sliding into the tray as though affirming you exist, you worked, you earned. They can edit the portal, but they can't edit the log. I added the printed sheet into my archive binder, the one already swollen with sticky notes. Polaroids, screenshots, and photographs. Sliding the paper into its plastic sleeve, I whispered aloud the words I had written so many times before. Do not argue. Archive. Because arguing here meant nothing. Dana in HR would nod politely and say, "It's just a clerical simplification." Logan would make some careless remark about job titles being just words. Camilla would smile, feigning surprise, claiming it was an IT error, while her digital signature laughed from the page. But the archive didn't lie. As I sealed the binder shut, the office around me felt different. The hum of fluorescent lights no longer buzzed with indifference. They sounded like static waiting to transmit. The ding of new emails no longer startled me. They sounded like footsteps, each one a traceable movement. I leaned back, staring at the glowing screen, the words, "Online Associate Communications," still flickering there like graffiti sprayed across my name. They thought simplification was harmless, that words could be shaved down without consequence. But I knew better. Words are the architecture of reputation. Change the label and you change the perception. Change the perception and you rewrite the story. Camilla was rewriting me, line by line. But in trying to erase me, she left her own signature behind. I tapped my fingers once more against the keys, letting the rhythm ground me. Then I closed the portal, shut down the computer, and placed my hand on the binder stacked heavy with evidence. Every attempt at erasure was an addition to my case. Every simplification, another brick. And one day when the time came to lay everything bare, Camilla's own name, her signature. Her digital echo would be the proof she could never undo. There comes a point when scattered files no longer feel like safety. Sticky notes tucked into planners, Polaroids pinned to binders, screenshots buried in folders. They were fragments. Yes, but fragments can be ignored. Fragments can be dismissed as accidents. What I needed was something larger, a structure, a system that couldn't be waved away with a shrug or lost beneath the weight of someone else's laughter. So I built one. I called it the ledger. Not out loud, not in front of anyone else, only in the quiet hours when the office floor emptied and the hum of fluorescent lights belonged to me alone. The word carried weight. A ledger is not gossip. A ledger is not rumor. A ledger is record. On my desktop, hidden behind folders named with innocuous titles, Archive Draft Reports, Lunch Receipts. I constructed a tree of directories, each one neat, deliberate, undeniable. Ledger, Conduct, HR Note by NG. Dana's polished reply about not actionable, her neutrality flattened into a sentence. Ledger, Credit Version, History.mp4. The screen recording of Camilla's digital signature authorizing the downgrade of my title, the cursor hovering like a guilty finger. Ledger, CCTV, Conference Room. Clip, Move a file. I'd pulled quietly from the shared drive, showing soup spilling across my blouse. The camera mounted high in the glass room, capturing laughter the way people averted their eyes. Each folder branched into subfolders. Each subfolder into files, the architecture growing like a cathedral built from humiliation and silence. Except this cathedral did not demand worship. It demanded recognition. As I organized, I spoke softly to myself, a mantra that steadied my hands. I am not a victim. I am the librarian of truth. Victims wait for justice. Librarians preserve the record, ensuring it cannot be burned. I added metadata notes to every file. Dates, times, names. I documented who was in the room, who laughed, who looked away. I layered in context annotations written not in anger but in clarity. If anyone ever opened the ledger, I wanted them to see the architecture for what it was: not noise, not vengeance, but design. Some nights I imagined the folders as shelves in a vast archive, the kind you find in forgotten basements where dust covers the labels. But mine gleamed, organized, each entry pristine. I was not burying this evidence in dust. I was polishing it until it shone. The act itself steadied me. While Camilla charmed executives and Logan scattered careless jokes across the office floor, while Dana folded neutrality into excuses, and Ethan hovered at the edges with quiet loyalty I built. Brick by brick, file by file. My silence was not absence, it was construction. I knew the risk. If someone discovered the ledger, they would call it obsessive. They would brand me paranoid. They would use words like unstable, whisper them in corridors, weave them into HR files. But they wouldn't erase the content, because content once captured outlives interpretation. Every click of my keyboard felt like a hammer driving a nail into place. Every folder created was a wall erected. Every file saved was a stone laid. And as the structure rose, I felt something I hadn't in months balance. The ledger was not revenge. It was insurance. It was testimony. It was a mirror that could not be fogged by laughter or cropped by leaves. When I closed my laptop late that night, I whispered into the dark. They are building a story. I am building a record. And between story and record, truth waits. Rehearsals were supposed to be the safe zone, the quiet room where words stumbled before they became polished. But at MSG, nothing was safe, not even practice. In fact, rehearsals had become Camilla's favorite hunting ground. Here she could test drive theft before premiering it under chandeliers and stage lights. We gathered in the auditorium, a space too large for a handful of employees, our voices swallowed by velvet curtains and the faint hum of the projector. On the agenda, a dry run of the client pitch. The deck was mine, built from weeks of data modeling, crafted line by line, opening statement, sharpened until it could cut through silence. But when the lights dimmed and the microphone was passed forward, Camilla didn't hesitate. She smiled, stepped into the circle of attention, and began. The words that left her mouth were mine. My opening recited with the practiced fluency of someone who had rehearsed in secret, smoothing out the pauses I had designed for emphasis. She didn't stumble once. Her voice slid over every phrase, confident, charming, undeniable. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, feeling the familiar cold press of the table's edge against my ribs. No one glanced at me. To them, the authorship of words mattered less than their performance. If Camilla could speak them well, they became hers. Something in me shifted. Fury tried to surge, but I pressed it down the way I always did. Instead, I reached for my phone. I pressed record. The red dot glowed silently on the screen as I captured the final 3 minutes of her performance. Every syllable, every inflection, every flourish that she had borrowed without permission. I wasn't going to stop her. Not here, not now. That would have been noise, and noise fades. But 3 minutes of audio, unchanging, time-stamped, irrefutable, would live on. When she finished, the room broke into applause, polite but enthusiastic. Logan whistled. Dana scribbled something in her notebook that looked suspiciously like approval. Ethan's eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second, then away again. Recognition, quiet and unspoken. I slipped the phone into my bag, the file already saved. That evening in my office, I transferred it onto a flash drive. Not just any flash drive, one I had chosen deliberately. Bright red, impossible to mistake. In another life, it could have been the envelope passed across a dinner table, heavy with legal papers and secrets. But this was the digital age, and the red envelope had become plastic, metal, and silicon. I labeled it Pitch, Rehearsal, Audio, MP3, and slid it into the folder of my ledger beneath Conduct and Credit. Then I held the drive in my palm, feeling its weight. Light almost nothing, and yet it carried proof. 3 minutes that could rewrite the story Camilla thought she owned. The color mattered. Red was warning. Red was signal. Red was urgency. If anyone ever asked, I could pull the flash drive from my pocket like an attorney placing evidence on the table. Let them laugh at soup stains, let them crop me from photos this file would not blur. I tucked the drive into a small case, the kind people use for jewelry. My jewelry was evidence. My adornment was survival. Later that night, lying awake, I replayed the recording through my earbuds. Camilla's voice filled the room, but this time it didn't sting. This time it sounded hollow, the performance stripped bare by the knowledge that I held the original blueprint. I whispered into the dark, "Not yours. Never yours." The applause in that rehearsal hall had faded. The audio would not. When I finally closed my eyes, the red flash drive glowed in my imagination like a warning flare, a signal to the future. Not noise, not rumor, but record. The archive had grown another brick. The ledger had gained another page. And I, silent in the corner, was no longer just watching. I was collecting, curating, building a library no one could burn. The award ceremonies at MSG were designed to glitter even when the prizes were paper thin. The company called them recognition rituals, a phrase that sounded more like religion than business. Once a quarter, we gathered in the atrium beneath two bright spotlights, rows of folding chairs arranged like pews. A lectern stood at the front, flanked by the company banner, and a stack of presentation folders embossed with the MSG logo in gold. That day, my name was called. I walked to the stage under the hum of polite applause. My blouse was white, as always, stubbornly signaling presence. The folder handed to me was thick enough to feel substantial, its cover smooth beneath my fingers. I smiled briefly, nodded, played the role. But when I opened it, the air inside seemed to collapse. Empty. No certificate. No bonus slip. Just a blank pocket, as though recognition itself had been erased. The executive at the lectern chuckled nervously, leaning into the microphone. "System error," he said, tone practiced. "We'll fix it later." Laughter scattered through the room, not cruel but complicit. Later at MSG often meant never. I closed the folder carefully as if it contained something fragile despite its hollowness, and walked back to my seat. Camilla's eyes met mine across the room, the corner of her mouth curved in the faintest smile. Not wide enough to be proof. Just wide enough for me to know. Afterward, the atrium spilled into the parking lot, employees dispersing into rows of cars under the sodium orange glow of street lamps. I walked slowly, folder pressed flat against my side like a shield turned inward. That's when Ethan appeared, hesitant but urgent, his phone in hand. "I think you should see this," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was near. He pulled up an email, the text still sharp against the glow of the screen. At first, it looked routine, an HR payroll update, but my eyes caught the edit immediately. A line strike through replaced with new text. Original relocate bonus, edited department surplus. My bonus had been reassigned, siphoned off with the stroke of a cursor, and the system recorded it as systems always do. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't show it. Instead, I pulled my own phone from my bag, held it steady, and took a screenshot of his screen. The artificial click of the shutter felt ceremonial final. Later that night, I sat at my desk with the empty folder open before me, its pockets still blank, still accusing. I imported the screenshot to my laptop, renamed the file with care S3 bonus, redacted PNG. Precise, neutral, irrefutable. I slid the file into the ledger nested under ledger credit, alongside version histories and audio clips. Another brick, another page, another artifact in the archive that was no longer just mine, but bigger than me. I pressed the folder shut, the clap of cardboard echoing too loud in my small office. They thought an empty envelope was a joke. They thought laughter could patch over erasure. But the ledger did not laugh. The ledger did not forget. Out in the lot, Ethan had said nothing more after handing me the evidence. He didn't need to. His silence felt like solidarity, or maybe it was self-preservation. Either way, the image was mine now. Proof that bonuses could be stolen, that recognition could be hollowed out, that entire ceremonies could turn into staged illusions. I leaned back, the hum of my computer filling the room. My eyes fell once more on the file name glowing against the screen, S3, bonus, redacted, PNG. Cold clinical damning. They could hand me empty folders on bright stages. I would keep filling binders in the dark. And when the time came, the folder that seemed empty would prove to be the heaviest thing in the room. Patterns always repeat before they rupture. That's the rule of data, the law of systems. A trend doesn't announce its breaking point until it has circled back one time too many. I had been watching the loops for months, archiving every instance, cropped faces, blurred photos, stripped credits, redacted bonuses. Each one a data point. Each one a line on the curve. And like any model, I knew what came next, the outlier that changes everything. It arrived in the form of soup. Again. The glass conference room was crowded with the kind of energy people mistake for productivity paper. Rustling phones, buzzing chairs, scraping against the polished floor. The table sagged under the weight of cardboard boxes, plastic cutlery, and sweating soup cups stacked like fragile towers. Broccoli cheddar again, MSG's corporate caterer's idea of sustenance. It smelled the way fatigue tastes heavy. Salty, faintly sour. Camilla held court in the middle of the table. sequined blazer catching the fluorescent light as if she'd dressed for a gala rather than a lunch meeting. Her laughter was rehearsed, her hands expressive, her bangles chiming like punctuation marks. She knew where every phone was pointed, how every reflection in the glass framed her. And then, with a sweep of her hand, the cup tipped. Soup spilled across the reports like melted gold soaking spreadsheets and curling the edges of carefully printed charts. The liquid ran toward me in a slow, unstoppable tide until it reached the edge of the table and poured down. Onto my lap. Onto my blouse. White again. Always white. The stain spread quickly, hot and viscous, clinging to me in uneven blotches. It bloomed across the fabric like a signature scrawled without consent. Camilla gasped, hand flying to her mouth in a gesture so perfectly timed it might have been rehearsed. "Oh no," she exclaimed, voice pitched for maximum performance. Clumsy me. The room broke not into silence. Not this time, but into laughter. Not loud, mocking laughter, but the quieter, deadlier kind, the chuckle that signals acceptance, the snort that normalizes cruelty. Dana HR's oracle of neutrality even let out a small nasal laugh before disguising it as a cough. Logan slapped the table, muttering something about déjà vu as if repetition made humiliation funny rather than cruel. Phone's lifted lenses caught the moment. Somewhere another story was already being written without my permission. I didn't move. Not one hand reached for a napkin. Not one word of protest left my mouth. I sat perfectly still, letting the soup seep into the cotton, its weight dragging at the fabric, the smell rising like steam from a crime scene. My silence wasn't submission this time. It was a decision. I reached under the table fingers, steady, and unlocked my phone. The screen glowed pale against the shadow of my lap. I typed a single word, "Now." I pressed send. That was it. Just 3 letters dispatched into the network, carrying months of silence behind them. No one at the table noticed. They were too busy laughing politely, too busy adjusting their phones to capture Camilla's exaggerated apology, too busy enjoying the spectacle of a sister humiliated again. Camilla's eyes flicked to me briefly. She expected fluster. She expected scrambling napkins, red cheeks, a muttered, "It's fine." She expected me to play the part she had written for me, the woman who absorbs the stain and says nothing. But I gave her stillness instead, because this wasn't the first stain. It was the last. Around me, conversation resumed the incident, already sliding into gossip currency. Dana's pen scratched notes, Logan whispered another joke, the younger analyst looked away. Business as usual. But I knew something they didn't. Business as usual had just ended. The ledger was ready. The binders were heavy. The Polaroids were sharp. The red flash drive pulsed quietly in its case, carrying 3 minutes of stolen words. And now the soup, the humiliation that began this entire cycle, had circled back, marking the moment the loop broke. I folded my hands on the table fingers, sticky where broth had splashed, and stared straight ahead. The stain cooled against my skin, thickening into crust, but I welcomed it. It wasn't just soup anymore. It was timestamp. Proof. The final data point. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt recorded. And recordings do not fade. If you've ever had your work stolen and been told don't make a big deal out of it, would you stay silent or keep the evidence? Press 1 for keeping the evidence, 0 for letting it go. The executive elevator rarely opened on our floor. It was reserved for directors, investors, board members, people whose presence alone shifted the gravity of the building. When the doors slid open with a low metallic sigh, conversation in the glass conference room faltered. Even Camilla's voice, usually unstoppable, clipped itself into silence. Archer Beaumont stepped out. He didn't need introduction. He never did. His name traveled through hallways before he did, whispered in legal documents stamped in acquisition files. He was a figure who existed more in signatures than in conversation, more in contracts than in smiles. And now he was here, my husband, though almost no one in this building knew it. Walking into MSG not as spouse, but as shareholder. 2 security officers flanked him, their presence silent but heavy. They weren't here for me. They weren't here for anyone, really. They were here as punctuation, the kind of sharp period at the end of a sentence that made people reread the whole paragraph. He scanned the room once. Not lingering, not theatrical. His eyes caught mine, and for the first time all day I felt the soup-stained blouse grow lighter. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't demand explanation. Archer wasn't here for stories. He was here for record. "Are you okay?" he asked simply. 3 words. Direct private human. Not a performance for the others. Not the hollow, "Oh no, Camilla had rehearsed earlier." It was a question stripped of spectacle, built of sincerity. I nodded once. That was all it took. Archer turned, and the silence of the conference room deepened. "Boardroom," he said to no one in particular, though the word landed like a command. The shift was immediate. Camilla's skin paled under the fluorescent lights, the sequins of her blazer suddenly garish instead of glamorous. Dana pressed her notebook closed with careful fingers, the neutral mask on her face cracking at the edges. Logan's grin evaporated, his jaw tightening as if bracing for a punchline that would not come. No one argued. No one joked. Chairs scraped against the floor as bodies stood uncertain but obedient. The working lunch dissolved into a slow procession. Papers gathered clumsily, soup cups abandoned half-finished. Phones slid into pockets, no one daring to raise a lens now. I walked behind Archer, the stains still drying on my blouse, feeling the current of the building shift beneath my feet. The elevator had opened not just a door, but a fault line. The hallway ahead glowed sterile under recessed lighting, but for once it didn't feel like a corridor of surveillance. It felt like a passage. The boardroom waited at the far end, its frosted glass doors etched with MSG's logo. A room larger, heavier, more deliberate than the conference spaces where Camilla usually ruled. It was the kind of room where decisions weren't debated, they were recorded. As Archer pushed the doors open, I caught the reflection of our group in the glass. Camilla's clenched jaw, Dana's darting eyes, Logan's restless hands. And me no longer on the margin, but walking directly into the center soup stains, visible evidence unhidden. We stepped inside and the doors sealed shut behind us with a hiss. For the first time, I realized this wasn't my archive anymore. This wasn't just my ledger. It was a reckoning, and Archer had arrived to deliver it. The boardroom at MSG was designed to impress thick glass walls, a table long enough to suggest empire screens so wide they could flatten entire narratives. But that day, it became something else. Not a space for strategy. A courtroom. A tribunal. A place where silence gave way to record. Archer sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Hands folded like a judge waiting for evidence to begin. Security remained by the doors, not looming, but present, the kind of presence that made excuses shrink in the throat. Camilla lowered herself into a chair, sequins dull under fluorescent light, her smile stripped away. Dana set her notebook down with trembling precision, as if neatness could disguise culpability. Logan, ever the jester, tried to sprawl casually, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. Archer didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He turned to me and I opened the ledger. The screen filled with the first file, CCTV conference soup.move. The footage rolled silently at first, the soup arcing through the air, staining my blouse, the room's uneasy laughter. The hum of fluorescent lights bled into the audio, punctuated by the unmistakable sound of a phone shutter. The image froze soup dripping Camilla's hand mid-gasp. Then came the second exhibit, pitch rehearsal, audio .mp3. Her voice played through the speakers, flawless, rehearsed each syllable exactly as I had written it. The last 3 minutes were enough. No one in the room could deny whose words they were. I clicked again. Version history PDF. The projector displayed the portal logs, my role rewritten. My degrees erased the digital signature of Camilla Vale glowing like a scar across the screen. Time-stamped. Irrefutable. Finally, I pulled up hrnote.png. Dana's tidy sentence filled the screen. They didn't mention you by name. Without identification, it isn't actionable. Metadata tags bloomed beneath it, time date origin. Neutrality rendered into negligence. The evidence stacked itself in silence. One file after another. 4 walls of glass, 4 walls of proof. I hadn't raised my voice once, but the archive spoke louder than any accusation. Logan laughed, thin, brittle, already broken before the sound left his mouth. "Come on," he said, leaning back as if casual could save him. "It's just office banter. Just jokes. Everybody knows that." Archer didn't look at him. Not once. His gaze stayed fixed on the screen on the record. Logan's voice faltered, dying into the static hum of the lights. Camilla shifted in her chair, her mouth opening, closing, searching for a script. No words arrived. For the first time, she had no line prepared. No spotlight to steal. Only evidence staring back. Archer's voice finally broke the silence. Calm. Even. Final. Effective immediately. 3 words cutting cleaner than any blade. He turned to Camilla. Terminated. To Logan. Terminated. Then to Dana, whose face had gone pale. Suspended pending investigation. No theatrics, no shouting, no debate. Just record turned into verdict. The air in the boardroom shifted heavy with the weight of permanence. The glass walls reflected our faces back at us, mine no longer half-cropped. Camilla's drained of color, Logan's stripped of grin, Dana's neutral mask shattered. Archer's reflection looked almost spectral, calm, inevitable, the executor of decisions already made. I closed the ledger. Not with triumph, not even with relief, but with certainty. Because for the first time, MSG's story wasn't told through laughter or captions or crops. It was told through record, through evidence, through the architecture I had built in silence, brick by brick, file by file. The soup stains still clung to my blouse. The smell still lingered. But now those stains weren't humiliation. They were exhibit markers in a trial conducted in glass. And the verdict was already sealed. When the noise of firings and suspensions faded, when the glass boardroom was emptied of its echoes, I found myself in a new space. It wasn't grand, no velvet curtains, no chandelier drama. Just 4 walls, a door that actually closed, and a desk that belonged to me without debate. For the first time in years, I walked into a room and didn't feel like I had to apologize for standing there. On the wall behind me, I hung the blouse. White, or what used to be white. The fabric bore 2 stubborn stains, one spreading across the back, another across the chest, golden yellow bruises of broccoli cheddar that no detergent could erase. I placed it in a frame pressed flat under glass like a relic. Some would have thrown it away, pretended the incident never happened. I couldn't. I wouldn't. The blouse became a warning. A relic of humiliation repurposed into a badge of survival. Visitors to my new office sometimes stared their eyes, catching the yellow blotches, unsure whether to laugh, to pity, or to pretend they didn't notice. I never explained. The blouse spoke for itself. To me, it wasn't cloth. It was a signal flare. Don't mistake silence for surrender. Don't mistake stillness for weakness. But fabric was only the visible marker. The real revelation arrived on paper. 1 week after the boardroom reckoning, a thick envelope appeared on my desk. Heavy cardstock MSG's crest stamped into the flap. Inside the updated shareholder statement, the cap table every executive pretends not to care about until their power depends on it. Pages of neat columns, percentages, names, ownership carved into ink. Camilla's name wasn't there. Logan's had never been. Dana's neutrality carried no weight, no shares. But at the very top, a line that silenced even the most jaded eyes, KN Trust 51% controlling interest. The initials didn't mean much to most of them, but to me they were everything. KN Kira Nguyen, my birth name. The name I'd tucked away years ago told it was too foreign, too heavy, too hard for clients. The name I had let Camilla bury beneath her veil polish. And yet here it was, preserved in the most permanent record of all ownership. Archer had never been the true power. He had been the representative, the visible face of the trust, the negotiator who smiled across tables while signatures shifted behind the scenes. My husband wasn't the shield. He was the courier, the instrument. The trust was mine. The majority stake was mine. The pen that signed the merger had always belonged to me, whether or not they knew the name written there. The realization spread like a tremor through MSG's upper floors. Board members whispered behind hands. Some stared openly, their eyes flicking between me and the statement, as if trying to reconcile the soup-stained blouse with the controlling block of shares. How had they missed it? How had Camilla, with her rehearsed charm and hunger for spotlight, never thought to check the filings? They had laughed at Soup. They had cropped me out of photos. They had erased my title, my degrees, my credibility. But they had overlooked the simplest, oldest record of all who owned the company they thought they ran. The stain on my blouse was one kind of evidence. The shareholder statement was another. Together, they told the full story. I thought of the phrases that had shadowed me for months. Trophy wife beta. Not actionable. Just office jokes. Camilla's polished dismissals, Logan's careless banter. Dana's neutral shrugs. All of it shrank to background noise beneath a single line of text, KN Trust 51% controlling interest. The name they had buried, Nguyen, had not disappeared. It had anchored itself in ink, waiting for the day it would surface. I remembered the smirks, the murmurs, the way colleagues avoided my eyes as soup dripped down my blouse. I remembered the half-face in the gala photo, the blurred bathroom image, the empty envelope. Every humiliation had been designed to push me to the margins. And yet here was the truth they could never erase. I wasn't a passenger. I was the driver. I closed the folder slowly, the weight of the papers grounding me more than any applause ever could. Then I glanced at the blouse on the wall, its stains catching the office light. They had called me an add-on, a courtesy hire, a name that slipped through the cracks. They told themselves I was writing someone else's success, someone else's title. But the truth fit neatly into one line, the kind you don't forget once it's said. They thought I was a passenger. Turns out they've been riding in a car that carries my name on the title. The blouse stayed on the wall. The stains never faded. And the name Nguyen, once erased, now sat at the top of the page, permanent, undeniable, a signature no one could crop. Retribution is tempting. When you've been erased, mocked, cropped out, laughed at with soup dripping down your back, the fantasy of revenge glows hot in the mind. But revenge is noise, and noise fades. What endures is record. What reshapes power is system. That is why in the weeks after the boardroom reckoning, I didn't waste time drafting speeches or staging symbolic punishments. Instead, I built something. We called it Clear Trace. On the surface, it was simple, a log system integrated into MSG's internal network. But underneath it was a fortress. Every contribution, data analysis, presentation, slides, even lines of code was now stamped immutable with its author's name, time, and context. No more clerical simplifications. No more oversight. No more convenient cropping of authorship. The log was the log, uneditable, unarguable. A commit could still be improved, refined, extended, but its origin could not be erased. When someone spoke in a meeting, the notes linked back to the draft where their words were first typed. When a chart appeared in a client deck, the system carried a tag identifying whose hands built the dataset. Credit was no longer negotiable. It was infrastructure. I sat in my office one evening, soup-stained blouse glowing faintly in its frame behind me, watching the Clear Trace interface flicker on my monitor. A timeline stretched across the screen, neat and sharp, every entry carrying a name. Kira Vale, Ethan Rao. Even interns had their contributions locked into the ledger. For the first time, the margins carried weight equal to the center. I whispered my mantra as my fingers typed the final command. Not a victim, a librarian of truth. Except now the library was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who dared to speak, to type, to build. And then there was Ethan, the quiet analyst who had pressed forward at exactly the right moment, delivering to me the words, trophy wife, beta, the drop of evidence that confirmed the entire culture's cruelty. He never raised his voice, never sought the spotlight, but his small act of recognition shifted the curve of the story. So I created something in his name, the Ethan Rao Scholarship. It wasn't large, just a modest stipend drawn from my own dividend, but it would fund training and mentorship for junior staff interns and overlooked contributors. It was for the ones who sat at the edge of the table, the ones who knew that silence could be deadly, but who hadn't yet learned how to archive their survival. The award carried one line carved beneath his name for the person who pressed forward at the right time. Because sometimes survival isn't about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about one click, one transfer of truth from the shadows into the light. As Clear Trace rolled out screens across MSG glowed with its interface. Rows of names attached to lines of work. Tags linking documents to their true authors. I watched colleagues blink at the change, unsettled, then slowly relieved. The system made arguments unnecessary. It replaced suspicion with evidence, replaced whispers with clarity. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just transparency, cold, clean, permanent. I leaned back, fingers resting against the edge of my desk, listening to the hum of the system syncing. For the first time in years, the sound of typing in this building no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like testimony. Would you trust a system that gave credit to the right people every single time? Press 1 if yes, 0 if no. The system itself became the final proof I hadn't destroyed MSG, I had rebuilt it. And the stain on the wall behind me, that stayed not as a reminder of revenge, but as the badge of why Clear Trace had to exist in the first place. Some stories end with applause. Others end with silence. Mine ends with ink. For years, I convinced myself that silence was the safer choice. If I kept my head down, if I let the jokes slide, if I pretended the soup stains were accidents instead of weapons, maybe I would survive. Maybe time would smooth the edges of humiliation. But silence doesn't protect you from erasure. Silence doesn't make the stain fade. Silence simply hands the pen to someone else. Lets them scribble their version over your life, their captions over your photographs, their signatures where yours should be. And when you surrender the pen, they take everything. They rename you, reduce you, crop you until only half a face remains. That era is over. On the shelf of my new office, I keep a notebook, plain, unadorned black cover. At first glance, it looks ordinary, but on its front, I have taped the wristband from the gala, the strip of thin paper that once marked me as just another nameless guest. The letters are faded, the numbers smudged, but I wanted it preserved, pressed flat, visible. Beneath it in thick marker, I wrote Kira Vale Nguyen, no empty fields, because my name is not negotiable. Not Vale without Nguyen. Not half a record. Not something to be simplified away in a portal or clipped from a caption. The space where they once left blanks has been filled, permanently. Inside the first page carries my mantra scrawled in handwriting deep enough to score the paper, each word a groove you can feel with your fingers. Silence does not protect us from being erased. It only hands the pen to someone else. I am taking the pen back. That sentence is not metaphor. It is law, my law. The ledger remains thick with files, a cathedral of record. The stains remain framed on my wall, no longer marks of shame, but warning signs for anyone who steps into my office. Clear Trace hums across MSG's servers, binding every contribution to its author, stripping excuses out of the system. And the shareholder statement still sits heavy in my drawer, carrying the name I had hidden too long, Nguyen. My name, my anchor, my proof. I've taken back the pen. But this is not just my story. It's a template, a caution, a call. Because I know I'm not alone. Somewhere, someone else is being rewritten right now. Someone else is being laughed at in conference rooms, their credits erased from reports, their face cropped out of the frame. Someone else is swallowing silence, believing it's safer than speaking. To them, I say, silence is not safety. Silence is surrender. The only safety is record. The only weapon is truth preserved. So I'll ask you, have you ever had your name written wrong in someone else's story? Have you ever been cropped, mislabeled, or erased until your role disappeared completely? Press 1 if yes, 0 if no. Comment wherever you're watching so that the voices cut from the frame can be restored to their rightful owners. And if this story carried something you recognize, if it reminded you of moments you've lived in shadows, then follow real family drama stories. Not because I'm begging for numbers, not because I want sympathy, but because every record deserves light. Every erased line deserves return. And because the next file, the next binder, the next stain reclaimed might be yours. The blouse on my wall is my badge. The notebook on my desk is my declaration. The mantra carved into its pages is my promise. I am not a placeholder. I am not a draft to be edited. I am not a name to be deleted from the record. I am the one holding the pen. And I will keep writing.